Have you ever wondered what secrets an ordinary American life might be hiding? Right in the barns, basements, or backwoods people never talk about. Most folks imagine secrets as quiet little things. Old letters tucked in drawers, debts no one mentions, or grudges buried deeper than the Montana snowpack. But in the northern tip of Idaho, in the rugged logging community around Priest River, one man held on to a secret that was larger, heavier, and far more unbelievable than anything a small-town rumor mill could cook up. That man was Walter Hayes, a 70-year-old retired logger with hands like weathered oak and a gaze that hinted he had seen more than he ever planned to say. Walter wasn't the type to exaggerate stories at the diner. He wasn't the type to gossip on a porch swing or chat anyone's ear off at the general store. In fact, he was the sort of man who lived life quietly, a hallmark of people raised in the American frontier mindset. Work hard, mind your business, protect your own. But in the early spring of 1993, Walter broke a vow he had carried alone for 35 years. Sitting at his cluttered kitchen table with the smell of old pine drifting through the cracked window, he finally told the truth. "I reckon it's time," he whispered to himself, though no one else was around to hear. The truth wasn't a confession about a crime. It wasn't even about fear. It was about loyalty, about a choice he made long before the internet, long before satellite imaging, long before the world became small and nosy. Back when he was a 25-year-old logger in 1958, working the steep ridges outside Priest River, he discovered something that would redefine his entire life. He discovered Bran, a towering creature with intelligent eyes, a presence both frightening and strangely familiar, and a resilience that seemed forged by the wilderness itself. But that discovery wasn't a moment he ever intended to share. Even in 1993, as Walter traced the rim of his coffee mug with a shaking finger, he knew that once the truth left his lips, nothing would ever be the same. America loved spectacle. It loved to dissect mysteries, to categorize them, to put them under fluorescent lights. And Bran was never meant to be put on display like that. Yet the world was changing. Technology was catching up. Rumors were leaking. Tire tracks had shown up on his property. Men in uniforms were asking questions. And Bran himself, older now, slower than he once had been, watched Walter with a look that seemed to say, "It's all right. Maybe the time has come." But to understand why Walter hid Bran for 35 years, to understand how a solitary logger could protect a creature the world didn't believe existed, you have to go back. Back to March 14th, 1958. Back to the thick smell of cedar, the icy bite of mountain wind, the steady rhythm of crosscut saws echoing through the forest. Back to the day Walter heard a sound no human ever expects to hear in the American wilderness, a sound that changed everything. The morning had started like any other. Walter and his logging crew were cutting timber along a ridge above Priest River. The work was grueling, dangerous, and paid just enough to keep food on the table. Men in the 1950s didn't complain much. Complaining didn't make the logs move any faster. By noon, the crew had spread across a wide section of forest, each man working his own marked trees. Walter liked the solitude of the job. He liked the predictable rhythm, the raw physicality, the cold air that kept his mind sharp. But around 2 o'clock, the quiet broke. Not with a snapping branch, not with a falling tree. Those sounds were familiar, almost comforting. This sound was different. A long, guttural cry, laced with pain so deep it seemed to vibrate in his bones. The kind of sound that stops a man's breath mid-inhale. Walter set down his saw. "Storm," he called out, thinking maybe his buddy had slipped or gotten pinned. No reply came. Then the cry came again, shorter this time, more desperate. Without thinking, Walter ran. Through the underbrush, around thick cedar trunks, up a slope so steep it burned his thighs. He followed the sound, pushing past branches that clawed at his jacket. Another cry. Closer. Clearer. He burst into a small clearing, one he didn't recognize, and stopped dead in his tracks. Because in the very center of that clearing, caught in an illegal steel bear trap, was something he couldn't have imagined in his wildest dreams. Something that would anchor itself to his life forever. Walter froze, unsure whether to run, shout, or back away slowly. His mind tried to categorize the creature before him, but nothing fit. The being was massive, easily 7 feet tall, even hunched over, its frame thick with dense muscle, and covered in deep brown hair that shimmered like wet bark in the afternoon light. But what struck Walter the most weren't the size or the weight, it was the eyes. They weren't animal eyes. They weren't blank, wild, or unpredictable. They were intelligent, focused, almost pleading. The creature, Bran, though Walter wouldn't choose that name for him until much later, lay awkwardly, its right leg mangled inside a cruel steel trap. Blood soaked the ground, dark and heavy. The trap itself was one of those oversized, illegal contraptions poachers sometimes set out of greed. Walter swallowed hard. "What in God's name?" he whispered. The creature growled, not a threatening growl, but a sound thick with agony. It put one huge hand on the metal clamp and pulled, but the trap dug deeper. Walter knew enough about injuries to see that the leg wouldn't last long if nothing was done. Every instinct screamed at him to back away, to call the sheriff, to call the forest rangers, to tell someone, anyone, what he had found. But another instinct pushed through, one shaped by frontier ethics, by the unwritten code of rural America. If something needs help, and you're the one standing there, you help. He approached slowly, hands raised. "Easy, easy now," he said softly. "I ain't here to hurt you." The creature's eyes widened, tracking every movement. Walter knelt beside the trap and examined the mechanism. It was rusted, stiff, jammed slightly off its hinge, harder to open than it should be. He glanced at the creature. "I'm going to try to open this. But you got to stay still. Understand?" To his astonishment, the creature nodded. A slow, deliberate nod. Walter blinked. "Well, all right then." The next moments were a blur of grunts, metal groans, and effort. Walter wedged his boot on one end of the trap, forced his weight against it, and pulled as hard as his arms allowed. His muscles screamed. The metal resisted. Sweat dripped from his brow onto the snow-crusted dirt. Then, clang, the trap snapped open. The creature yanked its leg free and rolled to the side, panting heavily. Blood ran in thick rivulets. The wound was deep but not hopeless. Walter backed away a few feet, breathing heavily. "There, you're free now," he said quietly. The creature looked at him, really looked. Not just as if acknowledging his presence, but studying him in a way that sent chills up Walter's spine. There was gratitude in that stare, surprise, and something else Walter couldn't yet name. Then the creature slumped, weakened by blood loss. Walter stood frozen for several long seconds. The forest around him was completely silent. Not a bird call, not a rustling branch, not even wind. "What the hell do I do now?" he muttered. He couldn't leave it there. It would die, either from the wound or from whatever predator decided it was an easy target. He couldn't bring it to town. People would shoot first, scream second, and question third. He couldn't tell his logging crew. They'd think he'd inhaled too many sawdust fumes. The creature groaned softly. That settled it. Walter's decision wasn't logical. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even sane by normal standards. But it came from the same place that made him help injured animals or carry his fellow loggers to safety after accidents. He had to save it, even if it changed his life, even if it cost him everything. He said the words out loud, as if speaking them would make them more real. "All right, I'll help you, but you're going to have to trust me." The creature lifted its head and nodded again. Walter blinked. Well, damn. What followed was one of the most grueling tasks of his life. He fetched ropes from his truck, felled a small tree to create a makeshift drag, and, inch by inch, loaded the creature onto it. The process took more than an hour, filled with pained groans and silent cooperation. Then he began the long, slow haul through the woods, dragging hundreds of pounds of injured mystery through rugged terrain toward his isolated property. Every step felt heavier than the last. Every snap of a twig made his heart race. He kept telling himself he was crazy, but he kept going, because something in those eyes had convinced him. This creature wasn't a monster. It was someone. Walter reached his property near dusk, exhausted, numb-fingered, and unsure how he hadn't collapsed midway. His small homestead, an old farmhouse with peeling white paint and a weathered red barn, rested in a quiet clearing surrounded by towering pines. It wasn't much, but it was his. And now, apparently, it was about to become a shelter for something the world didn't even have a name for. He maneuvered the drag toward the barn, every muscle burning as if aflame. The barn door groaned open, revealing hay bales, old tools, and the lingering smell of livestock from decades prior. Walter exhaled sharply. This'll have to do. He eased the creature, still unconscious, onto a thick bed of hay. Its breathing was shallow but steady. Up close, Walter noticed more details. The way the creature's chest rose and fell with surprising calm, the faint gray streaks in its hair, the human-like shape of its hands. It was impossible, and yet it was right there. "I must be out of my damn mind," he muttered. But his actions contradicted the words, because the next thing he did wasn't leaving or panicking. He ran to his house, grabbed bottles of water, old blankets, antiseptic, and a toolbox full of every item that might help in treating a wound he absolutely wasn't qualified to treat. Hours passed. He cleaned the gash as best he could, stopping often as the creature stirred or tensed. He sterilized the wound with peroxide, earning a deep, guttural groan, and wrapped it with layers of bandages. At one point, the creature opened its eyes. Walter froze. The creature studied him for several long seconds, then gently placed a giant hand atop Walter's wrist, lightly, intentionally. Walter whispered, "I'm not losing you. Not after all that." It blinked slowly, then closed its eyes again. When the worst was done, Walter collapsed onto a hay bale nearby, wiping sweat from his face. A lantern cast warm light across the barn. Dust floated through the beams like drifting snow. He didn't sleep much that night. His mind was on fire. What was he supposed to do now? What would happen if someone found out? Why did he feel, deep down, that this creature was meant to cross paths with him? As the hours dragged on, Walter listened to the soft, heavy breaths of the being that had quickly become his responsibility. Around dawn, the creature stirred again. This time, it tried to sit up. Walter raised his hands. "Easy, easy. You're hurt pretty bad." The creature's voice rumbled like distant thunder, a deep, resonant sound Walter couldn't decipher but somehow understood wasn't hostile. It tapped its chest lightly and made a short, low sound. Walter frowned. "Is that your name?" The creature repeated the sound. "Brrrn." Walter squinted. "Bran. That it?" The creature nodded. Walter exhaled. "Well, Bran, I'm Walter, and it looks like we're in this together, for better or worse." Bran tilted his head. Then, with surprising gentleness, he raised one hand and touched Walter's shoulder. A gesture that said more than words ever could. Walter felt something shift inside him then. Not fear, not confusion, but responsibility. Bran wasn't a monster, or a trophy for hunters, or a subject for scientists. He was a living being who needed help. And Walter Hayes, ordinary logger, son of a farmer, a man with no children and no one waiting at home, became, in that moment, the only person Bran had in the world. The first week with Bran was a blur of exhaustion and trial and error. Walter called in sick to the logging crew, claiming he'd thrown out his back splitting firewood. His boss didn't question it. Walter wasn't known for lying, and logging injuries were common. Inside the barn, Walter did everything he could to help Bran heal. He brought cooked food, meatloaf leftovers, mashed potatoes, scrambled eggs. He brought fruits and vegetables. At first, he assumed Bran might prefer raw meat, something primal and carnivorous. But Bran pushed it away with a wrinkle of his nose, surprising Walter. "Well, I'll be damned," Walter chuckled. "You got taste." Bran's recovery was slow but steady. His leg began responding sooner than Walter expected. The swelling lessened. The wound showed early signs of knitting together, and the infection, thanks to antibiotics Walter had left over from an old chainsaw injury, began to recede. But the most astonishing part wasn't how Bran healed. It was how he communicated. Bran didn't speak English, at least not in words. But he understood tone, gesture, rhythm. He could mimic sounds surprisingly well, crafting approximations of syllables. And his expressions, subtle, deliberate, revealed a depth of emotion Walter wouldn't have believed if he weren't witnessing it daily. Within days, Bran learned how to gesture for food, water, rest, pain, cold, warmth. He could point, nod, grunt specific tones that Walter found himself recognizing without realizing how. One night, after feeding Bran and tending to his wound, Walter leaned back on a hay bale and sighed. "You know, people aren't going to understand you. Not out there." Bran looked at him, blinked once, and tapped his own chest. Then he pointed gently at Walter. Walter frowned. "What? You're saying I understand?" Bran nodded. Walter felt something warm stir in his chest. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. As the days passed, Walter made changes to the barn. He added insulation to keep the cold out, installed a small iron stove so Bran had warmth at night, rearranged tools, hay bales, old crates, anything to give Bran more space and comfort. He even brought out an old radio from his house. When the music began to hum through the barn, Bran froze, eyes widening with fascination. "You like that, huh?" Walter asked, smiling. Bran reached out and gently touched the speaker, as though trying to feel the music as well as hear it. Walter chuckled. "Wait till you hear baseball season start. You'll be hooked." And something like a grin, awkward, crooked, but certainly a grin, spread across Bran's face. By the end of the third week, Bran could stand with assistance. His limp remained pronounced, and his wound wasn't fully closed, but his strength was undeniable. Walter knew the risk was growing. Anyone could stop by: a stray hunter, a curious neighbor, a lost hiker. The more mobile Bran became, the harder it was to hide his presence. But the idea of turning him over to authorities who would surely lock him up, experiment on him, dissect the mystery, filled Walter with dread. One evening, as he fed Bran another plate of baked potatoes, Walter said softly, "You know, Bran, I think you're safer here than anywhere else. But I gotta know," he hesitated. "Do you want to leave?" Bran's eyes softened. He touched Walter's chest with one hand, then his own. A clear message: "I stay." Walter swallowed hard. You're staying with me?" Bran nodded once, firmly. Walter leaned back, overwhelmed by something he hadn't expected, a feeling he hadn't felt in years. Not loneliness, not fear, but belonging. And so it began. The beginning of 35 years of secrecy, loyalty, companionship, and sacrifice between a solitary logger and the creature the world always believed was a myth. A story that would change the course of both their lives forever. Have you ever felt a connection with someone you couldn't fully communicate with, yet somehow they understood you better than most people ever did? That's what the next months felt like for Walter Hayes. By late April 1958, the snow had melted off the rooftops and mud season arrived in full force. The Priest River forest smelled of thawing earth, pine resin, and early spring rain. And inside an old barn at the edge of that wilderness, a bond was forming that neither man nor creature could have anticipated. Bran's wound healed faster than Walter expected. The antibiotics worked, the bandages remained clean, and the swelling had almost disappeared. Bran could walk, still with a limp, but steadily enough that Walter found himself worrying every time Bran took a few steps too close to the barn door. "You gotta be careful out there," Walter warned one morning, holding up a hand. "You go wandering off, you're liable to run into the wrong kind of hunter." Bran tilted his head, then mimicked a rifle motion, shouldering an imaginary gun, followed by a dramatic stumble and collapse. Walter burst out laughing. "Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much how it'd go." Bran's ability to mimic gestures was uncanny. Sometimes it was funny, like when he imitated Walter swearing after dropping a hammer on his toe. Sometimes it was startling, like when he copied the exact tone and rhythm of Walter's whistle within hours of hearing it. Communication wasn't the only thing evolving. Walter's routines were changing too. He was supposed to return to logging, but every time his boss came by asking when he'd be back, Walter would mutter something about lingering back pain or a stubborn fever. The truth was simpler. He couldn't leave Bran alone. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Something about Bran's presence filled a space Walter hadn't realized was empty. His father had passed years ago. His mother too. No siblings. No children. A girlfriend once, long ago, who said Walter was good at working but lousy at talking. He hadn't thought about her in years. Now he wondered whether she would have believed him if he'd told her what lived in his barn. Probably not. One evening, as Walter warmed stew on the iron stove, he noticed Bran watching the flames. Not just with fascination, more like reflection. "You thinking about something?" Walter asked, handing over a steaming bowl. Bran didn't take it immediately. Instead, he pressed a hand against his chest. Then he tapped the floor. Then he tapped his head. Walter frowned. "You mean home?" Bran lowered his gaze. "Got someone out there?" Walter murmured. Bran didn't answer, not directly. Instead, he curled his large hands into a shape approximating a cradle. Then he made a soft, low noise that felt like grief. Walter's heart dropped. "You lost someone?" Bran nodded once. Walter looked away, suddenly finding it hard to swallow. "I've lost folks too," he said quietly. Silence hung in the barn. Not uncomfortable, just real. Two beings from different worlds sitting in the dim glow of a lantern, united by loss neither had planned on speaking about. Later that night, Walter made a decision. If Bran was going to stay, really stay, he deserved more than a patchwork barn and borrowed blankets. He deserved dignity, comfort, safety. So Walter rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He installed more insulation. He fixed the leaking roof. He reinforced the barn door. He built a raised platform bed made from old lumber, padded with hay and wrapped in thick wool blankets. Bran watched him the entire time, eyes full of curiosity. When the bed was done, Walter stepped aside. There, that's for you. Best I can do. Bran approached the bed, touched the wool blanket, then tapped Walter on the shoulder. A gesture of thanks. Walter cleared his throat. Yeah, well, don't go thinking I'm running a hotel. You're still gonna have to pull your weight eventually. Bran grunted something that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. And so the barn, once a place for tools and hay, became something else entirely. A home, a secret, a sanctuary, a beginning neither of them could have imagined. By early summer, Walter and Bran had developed a routine as natural as breathing. In the mornings, Walter rose before sunrise, brewed coffee, then slipped into the barn with breakfast, fried eggs, sausages, or flapjacks if he had the energy. Bran always perked up when he smelled pancakes, his nostrils flaring with excitement. Walter loved watching him eat. Bran never devoured food like an animal. He ate slowly, thoughtfully, savoring flavors. He avoided anything raw. He preferred warm meals and seasonal vegetables. Sometimes he refused food that smelled too old or processed, wrinkling his nose like a picky child. Guess you're healthier than me, Walter teased one day. You eat better than any logger I know. Bran placed a hand on his stomach and made a proud grunt. Walter shook his head with a smile. As Bran regained strength, his personality became clearer. He was intelligent, far more than Walter had expected. He recognized tools, understood doors, and grasped cause and effect with startling speed. He also had a playful streak. One afternoon, Walter found him stacking hay bales into towering columns, carefully balanced, almost artistic. That your idea of decor? Walter asked. Bran grunted and adjusted one bale by an inch, studying the symmetry. Then he pointed at Walter's boots. Walter frowned. What about my boots? Bran clapped his hands once, as if giving approval. Walter laughed. Oh, we're doing fashion critiques now? Great. But the more time they spent together, the more Walter realized that Bran wasn't just smart. He was self-aware. He knew when Walter was sad, tired, frustrated, or deep in thought. Sometimes Bran would mimic Walter's frown, then gently nudge him with one massive finger, as if trying to pull him back into the moment. One night, Walter sat in the barn polishing an old photo of his father. The edges were worn, the image faded, but the memory remained sharp. His father had worked the same forests, lived the same quiet American life built around hard work and simple pride. Bran approached slowly. He pointed to the photo. Walter handed it over. That's my old man, Walter said. Hell of a good guy. Taught me just about everything I know. Bran traced the image with one gentle finger. Then he placed a hand on Walter's shoulder. A simple gesture, but it hit harder than words. In that moment, Walter realized something. Bran wasn't just surviving. He was connecting. By mid-July, communication had advanced into something almost conversational. Bran learned to approximate several English words, short, simple ones that required minimal lip movement. His first recognizable word was warm. His second was more. His third, said with surprising clarity, was Walter's name. Walter nearly dropped his coffee when he heard it. You just said my name. Bran tapped his chest. Walter. Walter sat down slowly, overwhelmed. Well, I'll be damned. You're full of surprises. Bran nodded proudly. Once, Walter tried teaching him to write letters by scratching shapes in the dirt. Bran watched with fascination, but shook his head when Walter handed him the stick. Instead, Bran drew something on his own. A circle, two shapes beneath it. A tall figure, a shorter one. Walter stared. That us. Bran tapped the tall figure, then Walter, then himself. Family. Together. Walter swallowed hard. Yeah, he whispered. Reckon that's what we are, aren't we? The bond between them was no longer an accident. It was deliberate, mutual, growing stronger with every sunrise. And though neither of them knew it yet, the world outside the barn, the world of hunters, loggers, government officials, and curious eyes, was inching closer. A storm was coming. But for now, in the quiet cradle of the Idaho frontier, Walter and Bran lived a life built on trust, secrecy, and something deeper than either had expected, a friendship no one would believe. By late July, the Idaho heat settled thick across the valley. The forest shimmered under slow-moving clouds, cicadas buzzed in the treetops, and the scent of pine sap seemed to hang in the air like syrup. Inside the barn, the temperature climbed even higher, so Walter started leaving the big sliding door open during the day. That naturally made him nervous. Maybe too nervous. "Don't go wandering off now," he warned for the 10th time that week, hands on his hips. "I'm serious, Bran." Bran gave a deep, exasperated huff, almost human in its mimicry of annoyance. Then he tapped his chest twice and pointed at the ground. "Here, stay." Walter narrowed his eyes. "You better." Despite the reassurance, Walter kept glancing toward the door every few minutes. The last thing he needed was someone stumbling across the barn while Bran was sitting there like an 8-foot-tall surprise guest. It wasn't that Bran didn't understand the danger. He did. But the forest called to him. Sometimes Walter caught him standing in the open doorway, breathing in the fresh air as if the outside world sang to something deep inside him. "You miss it, don't you?" Walter murmured one afternoon. Bran didn't look back, but his shoulders rose and fell with a slow, thoughtful breath. He tapped his chest, then extended his arm toward the tree line. Walter understood. A home he couldn't return to. A world he couldn't risk entering. "Yeah," Walter whispered. "I get it." To keep Bran occupied, and maybe to chase away guilt, Walter began involving him in small chores around the property. Nothing strenuous. Nothing that risked being seen. Mostly indoor tasks, sorting tools, organizing wood piles, or helping lift heavy beams whenever Walter needed an extra pair of hands. Bran loved those moments. He approached every task with a kind of quiet determination, focused, methodical, almost deliberate in proving himself useful. One afternoon, Walter handed him a dull hatchet. "Think you can sharpen this?" Bran analyzed the blade, sniffed it, then set it carefully against the grindstone. His massive hands rotated the wheel with surprising gentleness. Sparks flew in faint silver arcs. Walter folded his arms. "Well, I'll be damned. Look at you." A low grumble. Pleased. Proud. Bran wasn't just adapting to human work. He was mastering it. He watched Walter's every movement with a craftsman's attention, copying techniques with eerie speed. But it wasn't mimicry for the sake of survival anymore. It was participation, connection, belonging. "Gonna have you building the whole barn yourself soon," Walter joked. Bran grunted, then pointed at the ceiling beam he'd reinforced the week before, his idea, not Walter's. Walter raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so you're already taking credit?" The deep rumble that came out of Bran suspiciously resembled laughter. But the real breakthrough came in late afternoon, when Walter brought in a battered old radio. It was a dusty thing, left behind by his father, barely working, crackling with static half the time. Walter set it on a crate, turned the knob, and twisted the antenna until a faint country tune emerged through the white noise. Bran froze. His head tilted. His eyes widened. The melody, warm, simple, drifting through the barn, held him completely still. "You like that?" Walter whispered. Bran didn't answer with gestures. Instead, he closed his eyes and swayed. A slow, rhythmic motion, subtle but unmistakable. The way someone might move if they'd never heard music before, yet somehow recognized the feeling. Walter's chest tightened. Something about that moment felt almost sacred. "You ever had music where you're from?" Walter asked quietly. Bran tapped his chest. Then he tapped the air gently, mimicking the rise and fall of the notes. Walter stared. "You can feel it." Bran nodded. "Not hear. Not understand. Feel." Walter lowered himself onto a hay bale, listening beside him. For a few minutes, the two simply sat in silence, letting the music wash through the barn. In that soft golden light, with dust drifting lazily in the air, Walter felt something shift, something he hadn't planned, expected, or even wanted to admit. He cared for Bran. Deeply, maybe more than was wise. Evenings grew slower, softer, the kind you wish would last forever. Sometimes Walter told stories, mostly simple ones. Tales from his logging days, memories of his father, childhood adventures in the woods. Bran listened with rapt attention, eyes following every hand motion, translating every tone shift into meaning. Other nights, Bran took a piece of charcoal and sketched simple shapes on wooden boards. They were crude but expressive: mountains, rivers, figures, symbols Walter didn't recognize. "Is that from your home?" Walter asked gently. Bran nodded. Then he sketched another symbol, a curved line above a pointed one. Walter watched carefully. "That the sky? Mountains?" Bran shook his head. Then he drew a second line below. A third. A fourth. A path. Walter spoke softly. "You're trying to tell me where you came from?" Bran touched Walter's chest, then the path, then his chest again. "Together. Someday." Walter looked down, heart pounding. "You want me to go with you?" Bran nodded once. Walter inhaled slowly, emotions twisting inside him. Fear, loyalty, responsibility, and something else he didn't want to name yet. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," he whispered. But deep down, he already knew he'd follow Bran anywhere. By early August, the quiet routine they'd built was starting to crack around the edges. Not because of anything Bran did, but because the outside world was creeping closer. It started with footprints. Human ones. Walter found them early one morning while carrying a load of firewood. They were fresh, so fresh he could still see where dew had been disturbed along the edges. He crouched to inspect the tracks. 3 men, all carrying heavy boots, all heading toward his property line. Walter's pulse tightened in his throat. "Damn it," he whispered. He dropped the firewood and hurried back to the barn. Inside, Bran was kneeling, sorting nails into little piles by size, meticulous as always. But he noticed Walter's tension immediately. His ears perked, head lifting like a watchful doe. Walter held up both hands. "Easy. Don't panic." Bran didn't. But he stood. Slowly. "Ready." Walter swallowed. "We got company." Bran's posture stiffened. "Not good." Walter paced the barn, rubbing both hands over his face. He had 2 options. Hide Bran in the crawl space beneath the barn floor. Drive the men away before they got too close. Option 1 would only work if the men didn't come inside. Option 2 meant confrontation. Walter hated both. Bran watched him anxiously. Not frightened, just waiting for orders. That trust made Walter feel sick with guilt. "This ain't fair to you," he muttered. "You shouldn't have to hide in holes like some kind of fugitive." Bran stepped closer. He placed a hand over Walter's chest, right over his heart. A gesture that meant, "Whatever happens, we face it together." Walter exhaled shakily. "Yeah, I know." He moved quickly, rolling a hay bale, covering the trapdoor to the crawl space, and gathering tools that could double as weapons if things went bad. Then he stepped out onto the porch, boots crunching against dry summer soil. The men appeared minutes later, stepping out of the trees wearing camo jackets and carrying rifles. Not loggers. Hunters. "Morning," Walter called, trying to keep his tone neutral. The tallest man nodded. "Sir, we're tracking something came through this area last night." Walter forced a casual shrug. "Plenty of elk this time of year." The man shook his head. "Not elk. Bigger." Walter's breath hitched, only for a split second. But the man noticed. "What about you?" the hunter asked. "Seen anything unusual around here?" Walter kept his face blank. "Nothing out of the ordinary." Another hunter scanned the property. "Mind if we take a look around?" "Yes. God, yes." But saying no outright would raise suspicion. Walter leaned against the porch railing. "Pretty sure this here's private land." "Just trying to keep folks safe," the tall one replied. "Whatever we're tracking, it ain't natural." Walter's jaw clenched. "Ain't natural doesn't mean dangerous." The man squinted at him. "You saying you know what it is?" Walter's heart hammered. "Just saying nature's full of surprises." The men exchanged glances. Suspicious ones. Finally, the tallest hunter stepped back. "We'll stay on the ridge then. But you see anything, you let us know." Walter nodded with forced politeness. "Will do." He didn't breathe until the men vanished into the tree line. When Walter returned to the barn, Bran was crouched behind a stack of crates, barely visible in the dim light. His eyes glowed faintly, reflective, alert, tense. "They're gone," Walter whispered. Bran relaxed, just barely. Walter shut the door, slid the latch, and leaned his forehead against the wood. His voice came out hoarse. "This is getting bad. Real bad." Bran approached, placing a hand on Walter's shoulder. Walter looked up, exhausted. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this secret." Bran tapped his chest. Then Walter's. Then the symbol he'd drawn days earlier. "Together." Walter let out a weak laugh. Yeah, he murmured. I ain't going anywhere. But even as he said it, a cold truth settled deep in his gut. The hunters weren't random. They were searching, tracking, getting closer. Sooner or later, they'd find what they were looking for. And when they did, Walter knew exactly who they'd blame. Bran, his friend, his responsibility, his impossible miracle. And that meant one thing. He would protect Bran, no matter what. The next week brought a strange kind of stillness. Not peace. Walter knew better than to hope for that. More like the forest was holding its breath. The hunters didn't return, but Walter sensed something shifting in the valley. When he walked his property line, birds quieted. When the wind rustled through the pines, it carried an unfamiliar tension. Even the ground seemed to feel different under his boots, soft in places he didn't remember, disturbed in subtle patterns that suggested heavy movement. Something had crossed the ridge, or someone, but Walter kept most of that from Bran. The creature already sensed danger, no need to worsen it. Instead, Walter doubled down on routine. Work, meals, radio, chores, anything to keep their strange, fragile life intact. And for a few days, it worked. Until one late afternoon, when Walter climbed up to the barn loft to fetch an old lantern and discovered a wooden crate pushed into a corner he rarely used. It wasn't the crate itself that made him pause. It was what lay inside. He brushed off the dust, pried open the lid, and stared. Cloth, twigs, moss, old scraps of food. A nest big enough for a creature the size of Bran. But it wasn't his. Bran slept in the hay bed Walter made for him. Always had. Walter's palms grew damp. Bran, he called down. Bran emerged from behind the workbench, head lifting in curiosity. Walter pointed at the crate. Did you make this? Bran shook his head slowly. Not me. Walter's heart thudded. You sure? Bran stepped closer and sniffed the nest. His expression shifted instantly, from curiosity to alarm. He recoiled, shoulders rising, fur bristling down his spine. A deep, guttural sound vibrated in his chest. A warning. A threat. Walter's voice tightened. What is it? Bran tapped the crate. Then he tapped his chest. Same, but not same. Walter swallowed hard. You're saying another one of your kind was here. Bran nodded once, sharply. Walter felt the barn walls close in around him. Another creature? Here? On his property? His mind raced. Was it tracking Bran? Searching for him? Had the hunters followed its trail instead? Before he could speak again, Bran crouched low, sniffing the air near the barn door. His muscles tensed. His breath grew rapid. Then Walter smelled it too. What earth? Musky fur. A faint, unfamiliar scent drifting through the cracks. Bran signed urgently, 2 fingers slicing the air, pointing outside. Close. Watching. Walter grabbed the old shotgun hanging near the door, not because he planned to use it, but because it made him feel less helpless. All right, he whispered. We stay calm. But Bran wasn't calm. He was alert, focused, every instinct screaming. Walter touched his arm. Is it like you? Bran shook his head. Similar, but different. Wild. Walter lowered his voice. Would it hurt you? Bran didn't answer at first. Then, he tapped his chest twice. Then his own throat. Danger. Walter's stomach dropped. Jesus. This wasn't a reunion. This wasn't family. This was a threat. Walter grabbed his coat. Stay here. I'm checking the ridge. Bran grabbed his wrist in a grip firm enough to bruise. Don't. Walter softened. I'll be careful. Bran slowly released him, but not without a heavy, pleading stare. Walter stepped outside, breath shallow as he scanned the tree line. The late-day sun painted the forest gold, but its beauty felt hollow. Every shadow seemed too deep. Every branch looked like it held a pair of watching eyes. He moved across the yard, boots whispering through dry grass. Then, a branch snapped. Walter froze, shotgun trembling in his hands. Hello, he called out. Nothing. Another snap, this time to his left. He whipped around, heart pounding, only to see a deer. Just a deer. Walter let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Get a grip, he muttered. But the unease didn't fade. He walked the ridge anyway, checking brush, looking for prints, hoping he was wrong. He wasn't. At the base of a fir tree lay an unmistakable track, huge, broader than a man's foot, shaped like Bran's but longer, heavier, deeper in the soil. Walter knelt, touching the edge of the print. Still warm. It was here. Recently, he looked up at the darkening forest. We're not alone, he whispered. And this time, the world felt smaller and far more dangerous. Walter didn't sleep that night, neither did Bran. The barn stayed dimly lit by a lantern, flickering shadows dancing across the beams as both sat in silence. Walter on an overturned crate, Bran crouched near the door like a sentry. Every now and then, Bran lifted his head, listening. The forest spoke a language Walter couldn't hear, but Bran understood every word. Walter finally broke the silence. Bran, this other one. Is it like you were? Back when you were hurt? Bran shook his head. Not injured. Not lost. Not alone. Hungry. Walter felt his skin go cold. Hungry for what? Bran tapped the floor, then pointed toward the window, then mimed claws. Predator. Walter needed a moment to breathe through that. All right. Then why come here? Bran thought for a long moment. His gestures became slower, heavier. He pointed at Walter, then at himself, then at the path symbol he'd drawn days earlier. Walter frowned. You think it's looking for you? Bran nodded. Walter pushed both hands through his hair. Hell, Bran. I didn't ask for this. Bran touched his shoulder gently. I stay because you saved me. But danger follows. Walter exhaled shakily. We'll handle it. Together. It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. By morning, the air felt thick with a kind of tension that made the hairs on Walter's arms rise. He brewed coffee with trembling hands, pausing every few seconds to glance at the treeling. Bran paced the barn, silent, restless, sniffing the air like a hound. Around noon, Walter heard the sound he'd been dreading, a distant howl. Long, low, mournful, but not human, not wolf. Something in between, something older. Bran froze mid-step. His eyes went wide, reflecting the dim light with an amber shimmer. Walter whispered, that it? Bran nodded once. Walter swallowed hard. Then what does it want from you? Bran signed slowly. Search. Find. Challenge. A shiver ran down Walter's spine. You mean it wants to fight? Bran tapped his chest, then his scars, then pointed into the woods. Threat must be answered. Walter slammed a hand on the workbench. No, absolutely not. I ain't letting you go out there alone. Bran stepped closer, towering over him, but not in intimidation. More like sorrow. He placed a hand over Walter's heart. I protect. You live. I face danger. Walter's throat tightened. Bran, you don't owe me that. Bran shook his head. Family. The word wasn't spoken, but Walter felt it. He sat heavily on the crate, staring at the floor. Damn it. I can't lose you. Bran gave a low, tender rumble. Then he walked to the barn door and listened. Walter forced himself to stand. We're not doing things your way or its way. We're doing it my way. Bran looked confused. Walter grabbed his coat, shotgun, and a roll of rope. If that thing wants to step foot on my property, we're going to be ready. Bran tilted his head. A question. Walter smirked weakly. I'm old, not helpless. They set to work. Walter reinforced the barn doors with heavy beams. He strung bells across the fence line to warn of trespassers, human or otherwise. He sprinkled gravel near the yard to make footprints clearer. Bran helped silently, using his massive strength to lift logs, move crates, and drag fallen timbers into place. By the time the sun dipped low, the property looked less like a farm and more like a frontier fort. Walter wiped sweat from his brow. All right, he grumbled. If that creature wants trouble, it's going to have to work for it. Bran gave a firm nod, his expression shifting into something Walter recognized, resolve. As dusk bled into night, Walter brewed another pot of coffee while Bran stood guard by the main barn door, barely moving except to tilt his head toward distant sounds. Walter sat beside him, shotgun across his lap. When this is over, you're going to explain everything. You're kind. This one. Why it wants you. Bran made a low, rumbling hum. Promise. Then, a bell rang. Soft. Faint. Far off. Walter stiffened. Bran rose slowly, soundless, massive, ready. Walter's heartbeat hammered in his ears. It's here, he whispered. Bran took one step toward the door, then stopped. He turned, placing a massive hand on Walter's shoulder one last time. Not goodbye. Not fear. A vow. Walter whispered. I'm right behind you. Bran opened the door. Night air rushed in. Something moved in the darkness. And the world changed. The darkness beyond the barn door wasn't the kind of darkness you get in a quiet Idaho forest. It was heavier, thicker, Like something living inside it was holding its breath. Walter gripped the shotgun with sweaty palms, his finger hovering near, but not on, the trigger. He didn't plan to use it unless he had no choice. But having it in his hands made him feel less like an old man about to be swept up in something far bigger than he understood. Bran stepped out first. Massive, silent, shadow merging with shadow. Walter followed, boots crunching softly across gravel. A thin mist clung to the ground, an unusual sight in late summer. It curled around Bran's ankles like pale fingers. Walter whispered, "Stay close." Bran didn't nod, didn't gesture. He was locked, listening. Walter scanned the yard. The bells he'd hung earlier glinted faintly in the moonlight. The closest one, strung between two old fence posts, still swayed from whatever had disturbed it. Walter's mouth went dry. It wasn't the wind. He raised his voice just enough for Bran to hear. "Where is it?" Bran didn't answer. Instead, he slowly lifted his arm and pointed toward the tree line. Walter followed his gaze, squinting into the dark. At first, he saw nothing. Only the thick silhouettes of pines and the faint flicker of a distant star through the branches. Then, movement. Not big, just a flicker, like something shifting its weight. Walter whispered, "Is that?" A low growl cut him off. Not Bran's. Deeper, rougher, like stone dragged across stone. Walter felt goosebumps rise along his arms. The shape in the shadows moved again, slower this time, more deliberate. Walter made out a form. Broad shoulders, long arms, taller than Bran by at least a foot. The creature stepped forward. Moonlight hit its face. Walter's breath hitched. It was vaguely similar to Bran. Same species, he guessed, but everything about it was harsher. Its fur was darker, more matted. Its jaws were heavy, with long incisors protruding slightly when it snarled. And its eyes, God, its eyes were wild, untamed, burning with something old and feral. Bran stepped forward protectively, positioning himself between the intruder and Walter. Walter whispered, "Easy now," but Bran wasn't listening to him anymore. He and the other creature were locked in a silent exchange, a language made of posture, tension, tiny shifts of weight. The intruder huffed. Bran huffed back. The air seemed to vibrate with unspoken meaning. Walter's mind raced. Are they negotiating? Threatening? Challenging? He wasn't sure, until the intruder suddenly slammed its fist into the ground with a thundering crack. Walter nearly jumped. "Oh hell," Bran roared. Not like the playful rumbles Walter knew. A full, primal bellow that shook the boards beneath their feet. The intruder roared back. And then, silence. The two stared at each other across 10 feet of moonlit ground. Walter whispered, "Bran, tell me this ain't a fight." Bran turned his head slightly, and Walter read the meaning in the tiniest tightening of his jaw. "It's exactly that." Walter cursed under his breath. "Bran, you don't have to do this. Let's go inside. Lock the barn. Hell, let's hide in the crawl space." Bran didn't move. He kept his eyes locked on the intruder. Then he stepped forward. One deliberate step. Acceptance. Walter grabbed his arm. "Bran, no. Listen to me." Bran gently removed Walter's hand and shook his head. This wasn't bravado. This wasn't recklessness. It was obligation. A creature without choice. A creature bound by whatever unwritten rules governed his kind. Walter tried one last time. "If you go out there, it could kill you." Bran looked back at him. Really looked. His expression softened, sadness flickering in his eyes. He touched Walter's chest with 2 fingers. Then his own. "Family." Walter felt something break inside him. He whispered, "Then if you're going, I'm going too." Bran stepped in front of him, blocking, protective, insistent. This fight wasn't for humans. It wasn't for Walter. It was between them. The intruder stepped forward, growling. Bran answered. Walter could feel the shift, like the world itself had inhaled sharply. And then, the fight began. Bran launched forward with shocking speed, too fast for something his size. The ground trembled under his weight as he collided with the intruder in a crash of force that sent leaves and dust billowing. Walter staggered back, shielding his face, shotgun clutched uselessly in one hand. The 2 giants tumbled across the yard, snarling, grappling, kicking up dirt. Their roars echoed off the barn walls like thunder rolling through a canyon. "Bran!" Walter yelled helplessly, but his voice was swallowed by the chaos. The intruder recovered first, heavier, more animalistic. It slammed a fist into Bran's ribs, then clamped down on his shoulder with powerful jaws. Bran roared in pain. Walter's heart seized. "No, don't you hurt him." Without thinking, Walter stepped forward. A terrible idea. A suicidal idea. But instinct overrode sense. The intruder whipped its head toward him, eyes burning, jaws dripping with Bran's fur. It released Bran and started toward Walter. Walter froze. Every instinct screamed, "Run." But his legs wouldn't listen. The creature was 5 feet away. 4, 3. Bran slammed into it from the side with a furious bellow, knocking it away just in time. They crashed together near the old fence, splintering wood, scattering bell fragments across the ground. Walter stumbled back, gasping, heart hammering against his ribs. "Damn it. Bran, don't get yourself killed." The intruder recovered again, grabbing Bran by the throat and lifting him off the ground. Walter heard Bran choke, an awful, strangled sound that ripped through him like a knife. The intruder roared into Bran's face, hot breath steaming in the cold air. Walter couldn't watch. He couldn't. He had to do something. His hands trembled on the shotgun. He didn't want to shoot, didn't want to hurt either creature. But if the intruder killed Bran, Walter lifted the barrel, took aim. His hands steadied, not because he wanted violence, but because he couldn't let Bran die. "Let him go," Walter growled, voice shaking. "I swear, if you don't let him go." Before he finished the sentence, Bran twisted with sudden, desperate strength. His massive hand grabbed the intruder's wrist. With a guttural roar, he wrenched himself free and slammed his forehead into the creature's snout. The intruder stumbled back. Bran fell to one knee, coughing, clutching his throat. Walter rushed to him. Stay back, Bran." Bran shook his head, weak, struggling, forcing himself up again. The intruder shook off the blow, then lowered itself into a crouch, teeth bared. It wasn't giving up. It was preparing to charge. Walter stepped in front of Bran before he even realized what he was doing. He raised the shotgun. "You want to fight?" he shouted. "Come through me." Bran grabbed him from behind, pulling him back, protective even in pain. The intruder hesitated. This wasn't how their kind fought. This wasn't the ritual. Humans weren't supposed to intervene. That hesitation saved them, because Bran lunged one final time, not with the aggression he'd used before, but with something different. Purpose. He planted himself between Walter and the intruder and bellowed so loud the trees seemed to shiver. The roar wasn't just sound, it was declaration. A boundary. A warning. A command. The intruder stopped dead. Bran straightened, wincing, bleeding, and slammed both fists into the ground in a thunderous display of dominance. He rose, chest heaving, eyes locked with the creature. Walter realized something. Bran wasn't trying to kill the intruder. He was proving something, claiming something. The intruder huffed, loud, frustrated, and stepped back. Once, twice. Then it turned and disappeared into the forest, crashing through brush with raw, furious power. But not returning. Bran watched until the sound faded completely. Then he collapsed. Walter caught him clumsily. Bran, stay with me, buddy, don't you do this." Bran's breathing was shallow but steady. His hand reached up weakly and touched Walter's throat. A gesture meaning, alive. "I'm alive. You're safe." Walter's eyes burned. "We're getting you inside," he whispered. "I'll patch you up. I promise." He dragged Bran toward the barn, a wounded friend. A protector. A miracle. A creature who had chosen him. And as Walter pushed open the barn door, he couldn't shake one terrifying realization. That fight wasn't random. That creature wasn't lost. It came with purpose. And it wasn't finished. The barn smelled of sweat, pine, and blood. Bran lay on the hay bed Walter had so carefully prepared, his massive chest rising and falling unevenly. Walter pressed a damp cloth to the worst of the scrapes along Bran's arms and shoulders, whispering under his breath as if the words themselves could heal. "You gave me one hell of a scare," Walter muttered. "You thinking I don't know what you just did? You could have been killed. Do you hear me? Killed." Bran's amber eyes opened just enough to meet his. No words, only a low, rumbling acknowledgement. Acceptance, maybe even regret. Or defiance. Walter couldn't tell. He cleaned a particularly nasty gash along Bran's forearm. The blood had dried in streaks that looked almost artistic in the lantern light. He dabbed gently, muttering apologies to a creature who had no reason to forgive him. "You're stubborn," Walter said. "You always were." But stubborn doesn't mean smart. He pressed the cloth harder, making sure the wound stayed clean. You could have been gone for good, and it would have been my fault for letting you out there. Bran twitched, almost imperceptibly, and reached out a massive hand to rest on Walter's knee. It was a gesture so human that Walter felt a pang in his chest. "You're lucky," he whispered, "and you better remember that." Outside, the forest was quiet. Too quiet. Walter knew better than to relax. The intruder had left, yes, but the trail didn't stop at Bran. It lingered in the mist, a warning that there were others who would be drawn here. Perhaps stronger, perhaps less forgiving. Walter exhaled, running a hand over his face. God help us if more come. He looked at Bran. His friend wasn't just a creature anymore. Not after tonight. He was a partner, a protector, a family member. And Walter realized something heavy and undeniable. He couldn't face what was coming without Bran, and Bran couldn't face it without him. He pressed the cloth a little longer on Bran's wounds. "You're gonna need rest," he said. "I'll be here." Every step. Bran's chest rose and fell more evenly now. He wasn't speaking. He didn't need to. Walter could feel the gratitude in the subtle shift of his posture, the way he leaned slightly toward him. Family. That word kept echoing in Walter's mind. For hours, Walter stayed there, tending, listening, imagining the world outside, trying to push in. By midnight, Bran's breathing was steady. Walter finally allowed himself to slouch against the wall of the barn, exhaustion washing over him. Sleep came slowly, one eye always open. Morning arrived like a whisper. The tension had not lifted. In fact, it had thickened overnight. Walter brewed coffee with shaky hands, glancing frequently at the barn door. Bran moved gingerly, testing each limb. The fight had taken more out of him than he had expected, even for a creature of his size. Walter sighed. "You're going to have a hell of a scar to tell stories about." He gave a wry smile, trying to lighten the moment. "Hell, maybe I'll make you some more paint, huh?" Bran let out a soft rumble, the closest thing to a laugh Walter had ever heard from him. It was reassuring, but reassurance was fleeting. Walter walked to the edge of the property, scanning the forest. He needed a plan. The intruder was not random. Its appearance had intent. And if there was one, there could be more. Hunters, trackers, maybe even government types. He had to prepare for that eventuality. Inside the barn, Bran watched every movement. Walter knew it, every twitch, every glance. The bond between them had grown into something symbiotic. Each understood danger and trust in the other, even without words. Walter whispered, "We're going to have to fortify. Make it impossible for anyone to get in without us knowing." Bran nodded. Then he went to inspect the perimeter with silent precision, his instincts honed from a life far beyond human understanding. By late afternoon, Walter had set up traps, simple alarms made from cans, rope, and wire. He reinforced the barn doors with additional beams and blocks. He tested the noise-making devices carefully, ensuring Bran understood how they worked. Bran assisted where he could, moving heavy beams into place with minimal instruction. The creature's intelligence was astounding, the way he anticipated the weak points Walter hadn't even noticed yet. "This is work," Walter muttered, stepping back. "Not fun, but it's necessary." Bran grunted, a sound that seemed almost like agreement. Walter studied him for a long moment. "You could have just run," he said softly. "Gone back into the wild. Nobody would have blamed you." Bran's eyes met his. Then a slow nod. "Family." Walter swallowed. "All right, then we do this together." They finished the day in silence, each aware that nightfall would bring more than darkness. It would bring decisions, dangers, and choices neither of them wanted but both were ready to face. By the following morning, Walter had resolved something. The forest wouldn't wait. The intruder wouldn't vanish. If he and Bran were going to survive, they needed strategy, not luck. He drew rough sketches on the floor with a piece of chalk: barn layout, perimeter paths, escape routes, high ground. Bran crouched beside him, observing, occasionally placing massive hands on certain spots and tapping. Walter interpreted the gestures as agreement. Each tap reinforced a weak point. Each glance toward the door indicated where Bran would station himself. "All right," Walter whispered, "this is our home, and we protect it. No one gets in without knowing we're ready." Bran let out a deep rumble. It was a sound Walter recognized now, resolute, firm, unafraid. The rest of the day was spent fortifying the barn further. Windows were barred, old tarps tied tightly over weak spots, hay piled strategically as makeshift barriers. Bran assisted in ways Walter couldn't anticipate, dragging massive beams to reinforce corners Walter hadn't considered. At one point, Walter paused and watched him. "You know," he said softly, "you're more than just a creature. You're, you're a partner." Bran didn't respond. He didn't need to. Walter could feel it in the way Bran's shoulders shifted, the way he carried himself. They were equals now. Two beings, different worlds, united in a singular purpose: survival. Night came. Walter and Bran sat in the barn, listening. The forest outside hummed with insects, distant owls, and the occasional snap of a branch. Every sound was analyzed, every shadow measured. Walter brewed coffee again, careful to keep it near the entrance, both as a comfort and a trap. He knew that if anyone, or anything, came close, the smell would alert Bran. "We're ready," he whispered. "We just have to stay calm." Bran tilted his head toward him, then toward the door. Walter nodded. "Yeah, I know. You're ready too." They stayed like that for hours, side by side, a human and a creature. Not master and pet, not protector and charge. Partners, family. Somewhere in the forest, the intruder lingered, watching, waiting, testing. Walter closed his eyes, whispering a quiet prayer. "Let's just last the night, buddy. That's all I ask. We survive the night." Bran leaned against him, enormous bulk pressing close. And for a moment, Walter felt something profound: hope. Because together, they were a force no one, human or otherwise, could easily break. And outside, in the darkness, something watched, calculating, patient, waiting for the moment to strike again. The night dragged on slowly, the forest outside alive with unseen movements. Walter and Bran had settled into a tense vigil. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves, made Bran stiffen. Walter's pulse thrummed in rhythm with the creature beside him. Hours passed with only the occasional call of a distant owl and the soft whisper of wind. Walter was dozing lightly, one ear tuned for anything unusual, when a subtle vibration ran across the floor beneath his boots. He froze. Bran, already alert, crouched and sniffed the air. Walter whispered, "What is it? Who's out there?" Bran didn't answer, couldn't in words, but he padded silently toward the barn door, nose low, muscles taut. His senses had always surpassed Walter's own, and he trusted them completely. Then it came, a movement in the shadows. Something heavy, deliberate, calculated. A figure, watching from the tree line. Walter's stomach sank. Not a hunter, not quite human, but definitely not Bran. He grabbed his flashlight, heart pounding. When he swung the beam toward the figure, it melted into the trees, leaving only faint prints in the dirt and the faintest glimmer of reflective eyes. "Damn it," Walter muttered. "It's testing us." Bran growled, a deep, guttural sound that echoed through the barn. It wasn't fear. It wasn't aggression. It was communication, alert. "Intruder." Walter's mind raced. "We need to fortify more. Can't risk waiting until morning." They spent the next hour silently, efficiently reinforcing weak spots. Bran dragged fallen logs and stacked them strategically. Walter rigged more makeshift alarms with cans and string. Every move was precise, every movement calculated. Then the intruder made its presence known again. A low, continuous growl echoed from the edge of the tree line. Walter froze. Bran stiffened, muscles rippling beneath his dark fur. The sound wasn't just a warning, it was a message, a challenge. Walter's voice was barely a whisper. "It wants you out there, doesn't it?" Bran tapped his chest once, then toward the forest. "Yes." Walter sighed, rubbing his temples. He knew what that meant. Confrontation wasn't optional. Not if Bran was going to remain safe. Suddenly, another rustle, closer this time. Something massive was moving with deliberate stealth, circling the barn. Walter's flashlight beam caught a glimpse of dark fur, but the creature was gone before he could aim. Bran growled low, protective. His hand rested on Walter's arm, reassuring and commanding all at once. "Stay calm. I've got this." Walter swallowed hard. "Right, okay. I trust you." Hours passed. The tension became unbearable. Every shadow seemed to loom. Every breeze carried potential danger. Walter realized that their quiet life was no longer sustainable. Bran, sensing Walter's unease, pressed his massive hand against him. Together, Walter nodded. Together, he whispered. At some point, the first hints of dawn appeared. The sky lightened to a pale blue, painting the forest in muted shades of gray. The growls faded. The rustling stopped. Walter exhaled shakily, realizing they had survived the night. But survival didn't mean safety. Not by a long shot. Bran settled back into the hay, exhausted, still alert. Walter brewed coffee, hands shaking as he poured. He didn't speak. Words felt futile. They both knew the forest wasn't done with them. And they weren't done with it. By mid-morning, Walter was pacing, coffee in hand, eyes scanning every movement in the tree line. Bran watched him, tense but patient, muscles coiled for instant action. We can't keep doing this, Walter muttered, more to himself than to Bran. Not forever. Someone, or something, will find out. And then what? Bran rumbled softly. A sound Walter had learned meant we adapt. Walter swallowed. Yeah, adapt. Easy to say, buddy. But I can't fight them all. Not humans. Not whatever's out there. A distant noise snapped him from his thoughts. A vehicle, soft and hesitant, approaching the property. Walter's chest tightened. Not the hunters from before, something different. He grabbed his binoculars, scanning the tree line. A black SUV emerged from the forest road, tires crunching on gravel. Walter's stomach sank. Government? Military? Civilian hunters with connections? Bran shifted beside him, sensing the tension in Walter's body. He didn't make a sound. He only watched, eyes sharp, muscles ready. Walter ran through his options. Hide Bran in the barn's crawlspace. Attempt to confront the vehicle. Retreat into the forest with Bran. Option 3 was impossible. Too exposed. Too risky. Option 1 only bought them time. Option 2 dangerous. But sometimes danger was inevitable. Walter exhaled slowly. All right, we do what we have to do. He positioned himself near the barn door, shotgun ready. Bran crouched beside him, silent but massive. The SUV stopped at the edge of the property. 3 men in dark suits stepped out. They carried cameras, clipboards, and devices Walter didn't recognize, strange, technical, and intimidating. One stepped forward. A man in his mid-40s, authority radiating off him like heat. Good morning, sir. I believe we need to have a conversation about your property. Walter's jaw tightened. And why's that? The man's gaze flicked toward the barn. We've received reports of unusual activity in this area. Satellite imagery, thermal scans. We believe there may be a subject of national interest on your land. Walter's stomach dropped. Bran stiffened beside him. Subject of national interest? Walter asked, voice rising. You mean my property? My life. You mean, Bran? The man didn't flinch. We need to ensure the safety of all involved. And to conduct scientific observation. Discreetly, of course. Walter's fists clenched. You're not taking him anywhere. Not now, not ever. You understand me. Bran let out a low growl, massive frame shifting slightly forward. Protective. Fierce. The man raised a hand slowly, calm but firm. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Cooperation is in everyone's best interest. Walter's pulse hammered. I've been keeping him safe for decades. You don't just walk in here and... Bran tapped Walter's chest once. Calm. Walter exhaled, trying to steady himself. Fine. Discreet. But on my terms. The man nodded, apparently accepting the compromise. But Walter could feel the tension radiating from the 3 strangers. They weren't leaving anything to chance. Bran, sensing the subtle shift, positioned himself closer to Walter. Protective, imposing, ready to defend at a moment's notice. Walter realized that their lives had just changed forever. They were no longer isolated in the woods. The outside world had arrived, and it wasn't coming quietly. He pressed a hand against Bran's arm. We'll figure this out, he whispered. Together. Bran rumbled, a sound Walter understood perfectly. Always. Walter's gaze swept the property, the barn, the tree line. He knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. And soon, secrecy wouldn't be enough to keep them safe. By the next morning, the forest had shifted in tone. The wind carried an unnatural stillness, and the usual chatter of birds seemed muted, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Walter knew the strangers from the SUV were still on the property, somewhere in the woods, observing, calculating. Bran, still bruised from the previous night, moved with measured care. His amber eyes scanned every movement, every shadow. Walter had never seen him so alert and tense at the same time. A distant hum broke the silence. It was faint at first, then grew. A helicopter. Walter cursed under his breath. Figures. They're bringing in the big guns. The helicopter landed a few hundred yards from the barn, kicking up leaves and dust. Figures disembarked, wearing lab coats over tactical vests, carrying equipment that gleamed under the morning sun. Walter recognized immediately that this wasn't just military. These were scientists. The tallest woman among them stepped forward first, clipboard in hand. Her posture was precise, confident, controlled. She scanned the barn, then Walter, and finally Bran. "Mr. Thompson?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but carried authority. "I'm Dr. Ellen Reeves. We've been assigned to observe and study your guest." Walter's jaw tightened. Observe? Study? He's not a subject. He's not an experiment. He's my friend. Dr. Reeves tilted her head slightly. "I understand your concern. And I assure you, our methods are non-invasive. We respect boundaries, but we have protocols, legal obligations." Bran growled softly, shifting closer to Walter. Protective, assertive. Walter placed a hand on Bran's arm. "Easy, buddy. I got this." Dr. Reeves held up a hand. "We'll need cooperation to ensure safety. For you, for him, and for our team." Walter exhaled slowly. He knew there was no real choice here. The government had satellite evidence, thermal imagery, even photographs of Bran. Resistance was only going to make things worse. "Fine," Walter said. "But we do this my way. He stays here. You stay out of his space unless invited." "Understood." Dr. Reeves smiled slightly. "Agreed. Non-invasive only. And you'll remain his caretaker." Bran tapped his chest once, affirmation. Walter turned to him. "See? Told you we can work with them. But don't let your guard down." Bran's eyes narrowed. Trust. Hesitant, but present. The scientists set up observation equipment at a safe distance. Cameras, motion sensors, and DNA collection tools. All clearly designed to monitor without direct interference. Walter watched them work, ensuring they didn't cross the invisible line he had drawn around the barn and the forest immediately surrounding it. Hours passed. Bran adjusted to the presence of the cameras, occasionally sniffing the sensors with curiosity, sometimes leaning against Walter as if to reassure himself that he was safe. Walter marveled at how resilient Bran had become, physically and emotionally. From a wounded creature in a trap to a cautious guardian of the forest and the barn, he had evolved in ways that defied explanation. Dr. Reeves approached cautiously. "Mr. Thompson, would it be all right if we perform a basic health check? Nothing invasive, just a visual assessment, hair samples, and vitals monitoring. It's important for his long-term well-being." Walter hesitated. "You mean like needles, tests?" "He won't like it." Dr. Reeves shook her head. "No needles. Non-invasive. He won't even notice most of it. We can schedule it gradually." Walter considered the risks. Bran trusted him. If he consented, Bran might still resist, but at least Walter would be the one guiding it. He nodded. "All right," he said quietly. "But I'm there. Every step." Bran leaned against him, massive shoulder pressing down, silent affirmation. The forest seemed to exhale. The first week passed in cautious routine. Scientists set up discrete observation points at the edge of the property. Walter guided them on where Bran could safely roam, where sensors would cause minimal disturbance, and when it was time to back off. Bran was wary but cooperative. He inspected the cameras, sniffed the motion sensors, and occasionally tapped Walter when he felt a sensor too close. Walter realized how intelligent Bran truly was, not just reactive, but proactive, understanding the human's intentions in subtle ways. It was astonishing, almost humbling. Dr. Reeves approached Walter one evening as the sun dipped below the pines. "You've created something remarkable here." "He's extraordinary." Walter grunted. "I didn't make him. I just helped him live." Dr. Reeves smiled. "And that's enough. But it's remarkable how he adapts, even to humans and technology. Most creatures like him wouldn't tolerate this." Walter shrugged. "He trusts me. That's all that matters." Bran, sensing the conversation, nudged Walter's hand with his massive paw. Protective, loyal, understanding. The scientists began collecting hair and saliva samples, analyzing them on site. Preliminary DNA results confirmed what Walter already suspected. Bran was close to human, but distinct in ways that defied classification. Every measurement, every sample reinforced the uniqueness of the creature Walter had risked everything to protect. One morning, A low alarm rang from the sensors near the edge of the forest. Walter and Bran rushed to the barn door. Motion. Large. Close. Too close. A shadow passed just beyond the tree line. A figure moving cautiously, observing. Walter's pulse quickened. Bran, stay calm. Don't engage. Bran growled softly, a restrained, warning sound. The intruder stopped, and then vanished into the woods. Walter exhaled, tension leaving him in waves. It's still out there, he muttered. Still watching. Bran tapped his chest, then pointed toward the sensor. It will return. Walter nodded. Then we make sure we're ready. No surprises. The day ended with Walter and Bran reinforcing the barn and practicing routines. Bran moved with silent precision, anticipating threats, covering blind spots, always protective, always vigilant. Walter sat back, exhausted. You've been through hell, buddy. But we're not done yet. They're out there, and sooner or later, they'll try again. Bran rumbled, a deep, affirming sound. We survive. Together. Walter smiled, tired but resolute. Yeah, together. As night fell, the scientists' lights glimmered faintly in the distance. Walter and Bran settled into the barn, alert but unafraid. For now, the forest beyond waited patiently. Secrets old as time lurked in the shadows, but Walter and Bran were ready. The next chapter of their lives had begun, and the world outside would learn, slowly, that some bonds were too strong to break. By midweek, Walter noticed a subtle shift in the scientists' demeanor. They were no longer simply observers. They were messengers. Subtle changes in posture, occasional whispers, and a new weight of urgency in their expressions. Dr. Reeves approached Walter at the barn, clipboard clutched tightly. Mr. Thompson, we need to talk about what comes next. The government has been monitoring our data. They're concerned about his presence. Walter's stomach sank. Concerned? You mean they want to take him? Dr. Reeves shook her head slightly. Not immediately, but they're discussing intervention. They want a controlled environment for observation. They want to study him fully. They've assigned someone higher up. Walter clenched his fists. You mean they're sending someone to boss us around? To take my friend? Dr. Reeves' expression softened. I'm sorry. I tried to shield you. But they believe this is a matter of national security. You understand, don't you? Walter didn't respond at first. Bran, sensing tension, leaned slightly forward, massive body taut, eyes sharp. Protective. Walter could feel the quiet hum of anticipation in the room. Finally, he said, I've spent decades keeping him safe. I'm not letting that change overnight. Not for anyone. Dr. Reeves nodded. I understand. But you'll need to cooperate. At least until we assess the situation. The person they're sending, Colonel Hardwick, he's intense. Highly procedural. But he respects boundaries when they're clearly communicated. Walter exhaled slowly. Great. Just what we need. Someone intense, watching our every move. Bran grunted, a sound Walter recognized as both warning and reassurance. We adapt. We survive. Walter nodded. All right. Then we prepare. Together. The afternoon passed with careful observation. Bran had adjusted remarkably to the cameras and minimal human interference. He allowed the scientists to approach for hair and saliva samples, though every motion was deliberate, measured, with one eye on Walter. Walter realized something profound. Trust wasn't blind. It was built through respect, patience, and consistency. Bran had given it once, and he'd reinforced it constantly. That evening, a vehicle approached, a black SUV, sleek and ominous. Walter's chest tightened. Bran tensed, muscles coiling beneath his dark fur. Colonel Hardwick stepped out, a man in his late 50s, imposing, military bearing radiating from every movement. His eyes swept the property quickly, appraising everything. The barn, the trees, the forest beyond, and finally, Bran. Walter swallowed. This is him. Dr. Reeves nodded. Yes, Colonel Hardwick. He's been briefed. Approach with caution. Bran growled softly, shifting slightly behind Walter. Protective, alert. Colonel Hardwick approached slowly, hands raised in a gesture of non-aggression. Mr. Thompson, I'm here to discuss terms. I assure you, our goal is not harm. But we have responsibilities. Scientific, governmental, and safety-related. Walter bristled. Safety? You mean control. You don't get to dictate how we live here. Hardwick's gaze was steady. Control isn't the objective. Compliance with protocol is. That said, We'll need full cooperation to ensure his well-being. Non-invasive, yes, but full monitoring. He's too important to risk mistakes. Bran leaned forward slightly, growl low and warning. Walter placed a hand on his shoulder. Easy, buddy. I got this. Walter met Hardwick's eyes. We do this my way. He stays here. You respect that. Hardwick studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Agreed. But remember, we're watching for his safety. And yours. Walter exhaled, tension easing slightly. Fine. We survive this together. That's the only way. Bran rumbled softly, a sound Walter recognized as agreement. Over the next several days, a cautious routine settled in. Scientists set up temporary stations at a distance. Cameras, sensors, and monitoring devices dotted the perimeter. Walter guided them meticulously, ensuring minimal intrusion. Bran adapted quickly. At first, he was wary, pacing the barn and yard. But gradually, he learned the rhythms of observation. He sniffed at the sensors, tapped Walter when something was out of place, and even allowed small devices to record his movements without resistance. Walter marveled at him. Bran's intelligence wasn't just physical, it was emotional, perceptive, almost uncanny. He read intention and emotion with uncanny precision. Dr. Reeves visited Walter mid-morning. He's remarkable, she said quietly. I've never seen a creature respond to observation so willingly. He's learning our boundaries, trusting you enough to let us study him minimally. Walter nodded. Yeah, he's smart, but he's also protective. Mess with him, or me, and it won't end well. Dr. Reeves smiled faintly. We don't intend to. That's why we follow your lead. Meanwhile, Bran explored the forest perimeter, testing the limits of the property. He discovered weak points in fencing, checked tree lines for intrusions, and practiced silent patrols. Walter noted every action, impressed by Bran's strategic thinking. Night brought the usual tension. Crickets chirped, the wind whispered through pine needles, and the forest hummed with unseen life. Walter and Bran sat in the barn, alert but calm. Cameras flashed faintly in the darkness, recording their every movement, and Bran seemed to ignore them, focused entirely on the forest beyond. Walter whispered, You've done well, buddy. You're learning, adapting. This is your home, and we'll protect it, no matter who comes knocking. Bran leaned against him, a silent affirmation. Suddenly, a faint rustle in the trees caught their attention. A shadow flitted along the tree line. Bran tensed. Walter's hand went instinctively to the shotgun, though he knew the creature would act before he could react. The shadow disappeared. Walter exhaled slowly. It's still out there, watching, waiting, testing us. Bran rumbled, a sound Walter understood perfectly. We're ready, always ready. As the night deepened, Walter realized something important. The outside world had arrived. The secret could not remain hidden indefinitely, but with patience, intelligence, and trust, they could face whatever came next. He placed a hand on Bran's shoulder. We've survived everything so far, buddy, and we'll survive whatever comes next. Together, Bran leaned in closer, a massive, protective gesture, and rumbled deeply. Together, outside, the forest waited, patient and calculating. Inside, Walter and Bran settled into a new rhythm of vigilance and trust. Observation had become a game of respect, a delicate balance between the humans and the creature they were trying to understand. And deep down, Walter knew one undeniable truth. The next challenge would test everything they had built, their bond, their patience, their courage. But he also knew they would face it side by side. Always. The days following Colonel Hardwick's arrival brought an unsettling shift in the atmosphere at Walter's property. What had begun as cautious observation evolved into subtle pressure. Black SUVs patrolled the perimeter, satellites scanned overhead, and Walter felt the weight of eyes he couldn't see but could imagine everywhere. Bran had adapted to the routines. Cameras no longer startled him. He moved calmly, confident, protective of Walter and the barn. Yet, even his amber eyes betrayed subtle unease. He sensed the tension, the invisible net slowly tightening. Walter paced the barn one evening, muttering under his breath. We're walking a thin line, buddy. One misstep, one rumor, and they'll take everything from us. Bran pressed his massive shoulder against Walter's arm, a reminder they faced the challenge together. Dr. Reeves approached quietly, tablet in hand. Mr. Thompson, I need to be honest. There are reports leaking. Satellite images have been intercepted by media sources. People know something is here. Walter froze. Leaked? What do you mean leaked? How? Dr. Reeves shook her head. We're not sure. Possibly unauthorized personnel or a rogue tracker. But the bottom line is this. If the media gets the wrong idea or the wrong people, it could compromise him and you. Walter's fists clenched. Damn it. Every day we've fought to stay hidden, and now it's all slipping away. Bran growled softly. A warning, restrained but clear. Protective. Walter placed a hand on his fur. I know, buddy. I know. Dr. Reeves continued, voice low. Colonel Hardwick insists on controlled disclosure to protect him. He wants a plan. Publicity, managed and factual. He's arguing it's safer than secrecy now. Walter shook his head. Safer? For who? Him or you? I've been keeping him alive for decades without your satellites or your fancy equipment. And I'm not handing him over, not even partially. Bran tapped his chest once, affirmation of Walter's resolve. We protect. Together. Walter exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He knew the truth. Secrecy was failing. He had to adapt, as Bran had taught him to adapt. But he would not compromise Bran's dignity. He would not allow fear to dictate terms. That night, Walter and Bran patrolled the perimeter. The forest was alive with nocturnal sounds, rustling leaves, distant howls, the whisper of wind through the pines. Every shadow was measured, every movement calculated. Walter muttered to himself, if they think they can pressure us, they're wrong. He's not a specimen. He's family. And we survive together. Bran rumbled in agreement. A deep, comforting sound that made Walter's chest tighten with emotion. Suddenly, lights flickered in the distance. Not from the barn, not from the perimeter. It was coming from the forest road, growing brighter. Walter froze. Bran, stay calm. The headlights revealed a small convoy of black SUVs, moving deliberately toward the barn. Bran's muscles coiled beneath his fur, his eyes fixed on the approaching vehicles. Walter gritted his teeth. Looks like the time for subtlety is over. He and Bran retreated to vantage points near the barn windows, watching. The convoy stopped. Figures emerged, agents, cameras, devices. Walter recognized a few scientists among them. Colonel Hardwick stepped out, clipboard in hand, authority radiating. Walter whispered, they're coming to negotiate or intimidate. Either way, we can't back down. Bran rumbled low, shifting slightly forward, a warning to all. Walter took a deep breath. All right, let's do this together. Within hours of the SUV's arrival, whispers began to circulate. Satellite images leaked to online forums. Hikers reported glimpses of an enormous, human-like figure near Walter's property. Social media buzzed with speculation. Was it Bigfoot? A hoax? Or something else entirely? Walter and Bran watched from the barn, tension coiling in every muscle. Bran paced, sniffing the air, ears flicking toward every sound. He had encountered danger before, but the chaotic intrusion of media and rumor was unfamiliar. Dr. Reeves approached Walter cautiously. The leaks are escalating. Journalists, bloggers, even amateur investigators are showing up at the edge of the forest. Colonel Hardwick wants to do a controlled release. Make the story official before it spirals out of control. Walter shook his head. No, not like this. He's not a story. He's Bran. You understand? He's not an experiment, not a headline, not a curiosity. Bran tapped Walter's chest in agreement. Protect. Defend. Resist. Outside, vehicles lined the road. Cameras flashed in the distance. Protesters and enthusiasts gathered. Some sought proof. Others sought sensationalism. The forest that had been their sanctuary was now a stage. Walter realized a difficult truth. Control was slipping, and secrecy was no longer an option. But he refused to let Bran become a spectacle. Colonel Hardwick's voice came over a megaphone from the edge of the property. Mr. Thompson, we need to cooperate. Controlled disclosure protects everyone, including your friend. Walter's jaw tightened. He gestured to Bran, who had grown even more imposing in his protective stance. Bran isn't a specimen. He's my responsibility, and I decide how his life is shared. Understood. Bran rumbled low, a warning and declaration combined. Hardwick studied them both, eyes narrowing, then nodded slightly. Understood, but the world is watching. And eventually, the world will know. Walter exhaled. Then they'll have to learn on my terms. and they won't touch him without me. As night fell, Walter and Bran retreated inside the barn. The sounds of the forest were drowned by distant shouts, camera clicks, and the hum of curious voices. Bran lay close, massive body pressed against Walter, as if lending strength to his human counterpart. Walter whispered, "We survived this, buddy. They won't break us. Not today, not ever." Bran rumbled, a deep affirmation. Together. Outside, the media frenzy continued. Inside, a quiet determination settled. Walter knew they were at a crossroads. Secrecy was gone, but integrity, trust, and loyalty remained. For Bran, for himself, for the decades they had shared, Walter understood one thing with absolute clarity. The bond they had forged would withstand anything. And in that moment, amidst chaos and intrusion, he promised silently, no one would exploit Bran. Not the media, not the government, not anyone. Together, they would survive. The storm had arrived, but Walter and Bran would weather it, side by side. By dawn, a fragile routine had emerged. The scientists moved deliberately, observing from discreet positions. Cameras and motion sensors dotted the property, yet every setup was approved by Walter. Bran, cautious but resilient, patrolled the barn and forest edges. He had adapted remarkably, allowing non-invasive observation while maintaining control over his environment. His massive frame was always alert, a living shield for Walter. Walter brewed coffee, watching Bran from the doorway. "You're doing good, buddy. Smarter than any human, that's for sure." Bran rumbled softly, his amber eyes tracking the movements of a camera perched on a distant tree. He tilted his head, as if calculating the intentions of unseen watchers. Dr. Reeves approached, stepping lightly to avoid startling him. "Mr. Thompson, his cooperation is extraordinary. He's learning quickly, recognizing safe areas, ignoring threats, even engaging selectively with the team." Walter nodded. "Yeah, he's not just big and strong. He's careful, loyal, protective. Everything I've seen in him, it's real." The day passed with subtle tension. Occasionally, shadows from the nearby forest moved, agents, trackers, even curious hikers testing boundaries. Bran remained calm, measured, signaling to Walter with taps and low rumbles when something drew near. Walter realized that Bran's intelligence extended beyond instinct. He was not only anticipating threats, he was analyzing them. Each movement, each sound, was cataloged, weighed, and assessed before deciding on a response. Dr. Reeves observed silently, her tablet recording notes. "He's adapting faster than expected. This could change everything we know about his kind." Walter grunted. "Just keep your cameras on the edge of the property. He's not a subject for your notes. He's my responsibility." Bran nudged Walter gently, a reminder of trust and partnership. "We protect each other." As the sun dipped, Colonel Hardwick arrived with a small team. His presence, imposing yet controlled, brought a different energy. "Mr. Thompson," he said, surveying the barn, "we need assurance. You're doing well, but our priority is safety, yours, his, and the property. No one gets in without consent. We monitor only." Walter's jaw tightened. "You watch from a distance. You don't touch. You don't interfere." "Understood." Hardwick studied Bran carefully, then nodded. "Agreed. Controlled observation. Minimum intrusion." Bran growled softly, a sound of both warning and vigilance. Walter exhaled. "Good. Then we do this together. We survive together. That's the only way." Night fell, and the forest became an orchestra of rustling leaves and distant wildlife. Bran lay beside Walter, body pressing against his side, an unspoken shield. Walter whispered, "You're doing more than surviving, buddy. You're thriving. And together, we'll make sure the world understands you're more than just a story." Bran rumbled in affirmation, a deep, steady sound. "We survive. Together." The world outside was watching, but inside the barn, trust and loyalty held dominion. By midweek, media speculation had reached a fever pitch. Satellite images, leaked photos, and online forums had painted Bran as everything from a hoax to a dangerous cryptid. Protesters, hunters, and curious spectators gathered near the edge of the forest. Walter, sensing the danger, coordinated with Hardwick and Dr. Reeves. The approach was delicate, controlled observation, a clear boundary for public access, and preparation for legal protection. Walter and Bran patrolled the property, evaluating weak points, ensuring Bran's comfort, and monitoring intruders from a safe distance. Each patrol reinforced the bond between them. Mutual vigilance, silent communication, shared responsibility. Dr. Reeves approached with a tablet. Walter, preliminary data confirms he's healthy. His adaptations to observation are extraordinary. And the public interest, it's real. We need to consider protection measures. Walter sighed. Protection from who? The people? The media? The government? Dr. Reeves smiled faintly. All of the above. Controlled disclosure is one way. Legal protection is another. He's unique, valuable, not for exploitation, but for conservation. And if we move carefully, we can secure his safety legally. Walter looked at Bran, massive form coiled in the shade of the barn. I don't care what it takes. He's staying here. He's safe. That's all that matters. Bran rumbled, amber eyes meeting Walter's. We survive. Together. The following day, Hardwick arrived with legal advisors and security experts. The plan was meticulous. Bran would remain on the property under classified protection. Walter retained full custodial rights, and only non-invasive observation would be allowed. Walter listened carefully, weighing every word. So you're saying, he's protected, but we can't let anyone interfere? Hardwick nodded. Exactly. You keep him here, maintain his routines, and the government ensures safety. Any intrusion from outsiders will be addressed immediately. Walter exhaled, tension easing slightly. All right, then we do it. We protect him. Together. Bran, sensing the agreement, tapped Walter's chest, affirmation. Walter smiled. See? They understand. Mostly. The forest seemed to sigh. For the first time in weeks, a sense of cautious security settled over the barn. Walter knew this was only temporary. Public curiosity, government priorities, and human greed could return at any moment. But for now, Bran had legal protection. Observers respected boundaries, and the bond that had carried them through decades of isolation remained unbroken. Walter sat beside Bran that evening, amber eyes meeting his. We did it, buddy. We survived the storm. For now, Bran rumbled, a deep, steady affirmation. For now, together. Walter exhaled, relief mingling with resolve. Tomorrow, we keep him safe. The world may be curious, but no one touches him. Not without me. The night settled, forest alive with the hum of life. Inside the barn, Walter and Bran remained vigilant, bound by decades of trust, protection, and unspoken understanding. Together, they had faced secrecy, danger, and intrusion. And together, they would continue to survive whatever came next. It was early May when the decision was made. The leaks had grown uncontrollable, rumors and sightings circulating online and in tabloids. Colonel Hardwick, in consultation with Walter and Dr. Reeves, announced controlled disclosure. Walter had spent hours pacing the barn, Bran beside him, trying to prepare for what he dreaded most, the world knowing Bran existed. Are you ready for this, buddy? Walter whispered, voice heavy. Bran pressed his massive shoulder against him, a silent anchor. We survive. Together. News outlets picked up the official statement. A rare, previously undocumented hominid had been confirmed to reside in northern Idaho. Bran's existence was classified as a critically endangered species. The public was urged to respect his habitat, and legal measures were enacted to protect him. The media frenzy began almost immediately. Helicopters hovered in the distance. Journalists and photographers gathered near property lines. Protesters and curious tourists flocked. Walter and Bran retreated into the barn, maintaining strict boundaries. Dr. Reeves approached, cautious but calm. Walter, this is the only way to ensure his long-term safety. Public interest is unavoidable, but with protections in place, he'll be safe. We'll monitor discreetly, and you remain his caretaker. Walter exhaled. Safe for now. That's all I can promise. But they better not try anything. Bran rumbled softly, leaning against him. A sound of reassurance, trust, and shared determination. Over the following weeks, a delicate balance emerged. Media coverage intensified but was restricted to controlled photographs and statements. Scientists continued non-invasive observation, documenting Bran's habits, diet, and behavior. Walter watched Bran adapt to the public's awareness without losing his sense of privacy. He remained vigilant, patrolling the property, ensuring no one crossed the invisible line. Bran moved with grace, aware of boundaries, occasionally allowing curious scientists to observe hair samples, vocalizations, and behavioral patterns. Walter marveled at him. "You've survived decades in secrecy," he whispered one evening, sitting beside Bran. "Now you survive in the spotlight. But I'll protect you. Always." Bran rumbled, a deep, steady affirmation. Always. Despite media attention, Bran retained his dignity and independence. The forest, once their sanctuary, had become both stage and shield. Walter knew that the world could never truly understand the bond they shared, but it didn't matter. They had survived secrecy, intrusion, and exposure. Together, they had endured. By late September, it was clear Bran's time was drawing near. Kidney failure had worsened, treatments stabilizing him temporarily, but unable to halt the inevitable. Walter spent every moment by his side, sharing stories, quiet moments, and reminders of the forest they had protected together. Bran's amber eyes still held intelligence, emotion, and warmth. He listened to Walter's voice, felt his touch, and remained a massive presence of reassurance and companionship. One night, Walter whispered, "We've done everything we can, buddy. You've lived longer than anyone expected. You've taught me more than I could ever teach you." Bran leaned against him, massive paw resting on Walter's chest, a gesture of trust and love. "We survived. Together." On September 26th, at 3:17 a.m., Bran took his final breath. Walter held him, tears streaming silently. The barn, once filled with the quiet rhythm of life, was still. Walter arranged a memorial. Bran's ashes were scattered in the forest, returning him to the land he had always guarded. Scientists and officials observed respectfully, honoring the bond Walter had maintained for decades. The legal protections remained. Bran's species was safeguarded, his story documented, and his legacy cemented in the annals of conservation and scientific discovery. Walter, now alone in the barn, felt the profound weight of loss, but also the enduring power of memory. Every detail of Bran's presence, intelligence, and loyalty remained with him. He often wandered the forest, remembering Bran's footsteps, his gestures, his rumbles of affirmation. The bond they shared had transcended secrecy, danger, and even death. Walter spoke to the visiting scientists one afternoon. He was more than a discovery. He was family. And that's what I hope people remember. Not just the creature, but the bond we shared, the trust, the respect, and the responsibility to protect the extraordinary. Dr. Reeves nodded, tears in her eyes. He taught all of us something profound. Compassion over curiosity. Protection over exploitation. Walter smiled faintly. Exactly. That's the lesson. That's what Bran wanted. Years later, Walter remained on the property. He never relocated, never sought fame. He cherished memories of Bran, knowing that their story had changed the world in quiet but lasting ways. The forest thrived. The species was protected. Bran's existence inspired a generation to value empathy, conservation, and the enduring strength of trust between beings. Walter often sat at the edge of the forest, gazing into the trees. "We survived it all, buddy, and your legacy lives on. Not in headlines, not in fame, but in the hearts of those who understand." Bran's story proved that bonds could transcend species, that compassion could outweigh exploitation, and that the courage to protect the extraordinary could reshape society's values. And Walter, holding that memory close, knew one undeniable truth: some bonds were eternal. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If Bran's story moved you, leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Like and share this video to honor the extraordinary bond between Walter and Bran, and help inspire others to protect the incredible creatures in our world. Together, we can respect, protect, and learn from the extraordinary. See you next time.